I came home from work, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the windows of the small apartment I shared with Betty. We'd been together for years, a bond I thought was unbreakable. As I turned the key in the lock, the familiar creak of the door greeted me, a sound that usually meant comfort. But today, it was different. Today, it sounded like a warning. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. I called out for Betty, but there was no response. When I reached our bedroom, the sight before me shattered my world. There, tangled in the sheets we'd chosen together, was Betty and Peter, my best friend. Time seemed to stand still. The shock was like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. Peter, who had been at every major milestone in my life, laughing and joking by my side. Betty, the girl I'd fallen for the moment I saw her, who I'd planned a future with. The two of them, together, in the bed I slept in with her. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The betrayal was a deafening silence in my ears, a void where my heart used to be. My eyes locked with Betty's, searching for an explanation, a reason, anything. But there were no words, just the undeniable truth of what was before me. As I stood there, the world crumbling around me, the story of us seemed to rewrite itself in my mind. The late nights Betty said she was with her girlfriends. The weekends Peter was mysteriously busy. It all made a cruel sense now. The pieces of a puzzle I never knew I was assembling fell into place, each one a stab of realization. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. I wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers, but the hurt was like a chokehold, silencing me. I turned away, the image of them together burning in my mind. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The rooms hung with the laughter and love that once filled them, now replaced by the harsh reality of betrayal. As I walked out the door, the future I'd imagined with Betty shattered into a million pieces, each shard a memory, a moment, a promise broken. The world outside was darkening, the evening settling in, mirroring the darkness enveloping my life. Betty's voice was a mere whisper, quivering with emotion. "Danny, please." Her eyes, red from crying, pleaded with me. But the sight of her, so vulnerable, so remorseful, couldn't erase the image seared into my mind. I hated to look at Peter. He had been more than a friend. He was like a brother to me. Our friendship had weathered so many storms, but this was unforgivable. "Get out," I said, my voice harsh and distant. Peter didn't argue, didn't try to explain. He just nodded, a silent acceptance of the irreparable damage he had caused, and left. The apartment felt even emptier once he was gone. Betty's sobs filled the silence, each one a reminder of the betrayal. She reached out to me, but I stepped back, unable to bear her touch. "Danny, I'm so sorry, it was a mistake," she cried, her voice breaking. A mistake. That word reverberated in my head. How could something so destructive, so hurtful, be a mere mistake? I looked around the apartment, at the photos of us smiling, unaware of the pain that was to come. My heart ached with a mixture of sadness, anger, and confusion. Betty continued to plead, her words a desperate attempt to mend what had been broken. "I love you, Danny. Please, we can fix this. It doesn't have to end." But could it be fixed? Could I ever look at her the same way, knowing she had shared our bed with my best friend? The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship was shattered. And yet, as I looked at her, so desperate and remorseful, a part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could find our way back to each other. I sat down, my head in my hands, torn between the love I still felt for her and the betrayal that loomed like a dark cloud over us. Betty sat beside me, her hand hovering over mine, unsure if she should touch me. The room was silent, save for the soft sound of her crying. The decision before me was overwhelming. Do I walk away from the woman I loved, or do I try to rebuild what had been broken? The weight of that choice was crushing. The words were heavy on my tongue, a sentence I never thought I'd have to utter. "Betty, you need to pack your things. It's over," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Betty's face turned pale. "No, Danny, please don't do this," she begged, her voice laced with despair. But my decision was made. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too fresh. I couldn't see past it, couldn't imagine a future where this pain didn't overshadow every moment. Her pleading turned to anger, a fierce refusal to accept the end of us. "I'm not leaving, Danny, I can't," she shouted. Before I could react, Betty rushed to our bedroom and locked the door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking into place was like another piece of my heart breaking. She was barricading herself in, physically and emotionally, from the reality of what had happened. From behind the door, her cries were loud and heart-wrenching. It was a sound that tore through me, a reminder of the love we had shared and the future we had planned. But now, those dreams were just shadows of a life that could no longer be. I stood outside the bedroom, my hand resting on the cold, unyielding door. The barrier between us was more than just physical. It was a chasm of hurt and betrayal that seemed unfathomable. The apartment was filled with the sound of her crying, a stark contrast to the silence that had greeted me when I first arrived home. I knew I should leave, give her space to process, to grieve the end of us. But my feet were rooted to the spot, torn between the need to escape and the urge to comfort her. As I stood outside the locked bedroom door, listening to Betty's anguished cries, I realized that my presence was only making things worse. I decided to leave the apartment we lived in because it was no longer a comforting home, but a place that reminded me of betrayal and lost trust. The process of moving out was a blur. Each item, I packed away a piece of the life we had built together. The pictures, the mementos, even the simple kitchen utensils, all held memories that were now tinged with sadness. It felt like I was dismantling a dream, piece by painful piece. After I left, Betty's calls started coming in. At first, I tried to answer, to maintain some semblance of civility in the chaos of our breakup. But her pleas and apologies overwhelmed my burdened consciousness beyond endurance. Reluctantly, I blocked her number, severing the last thread of communication between us. It was a necessary step, but it left me feeling even more isolated. Time passed, and eventually, Betty moved out of the apartment. The day I returned to the now empty space was surreal. The silence resonating within the rooms was both serene and eerie. The absence of her presence was palpable, a void where once there was laughter and love. As I walked through the empty rooms, memories flooded back, each one a reminder of what had been and what could have been. The apartment, once a shared dream, now felt like a mausoleum of our relationship, stark and abandoned. I sat down in the middle of the living room, the darkness surrounding me. The loneliness was crushing, a sharp change from the life I had known with Betty. It was hard to accept that this was now my reality, a life without her, without us. In the quiet of the apartment, I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the relationship that had ended, but for the future we would never have, the plans we would never fulfill. It was a necessary pain, a step towards healing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that this was not just an ending, but also a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find myself again in the wake of loss. The journey would be long and undoubtedly difficult, but it was a journey I had to take. And so, with a little reflection, I silently promised myself to move forward, one day at a time, into a future unknown but full of possibility. The story of me and Betty had ended, but my own journey was just beginning. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like this video. It will be very pleasing for me. And to not miss new videos, subscribe to the channel. A lot more interesting things to come. Bye everyone.